In today's video, we're looking at the latest trade talk. We're looking at the Toronto Maple Leafs. Will they trade for a goalie after the injury to Ilya Samsonov? We're also going to take a look at Nick Robertson's future in Toronto. Is there any chance the Leafs will consider moving him for upgrades on the back? And we also have some updates on the Montreal Canadiens, Bo Horvat's contract situation, several injury updates, and Panthers forward Matthew Tkachuk has been suspended. We'll discuss all the latest coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a variety of NHL news and some trade rumors to take a look at today. First up, we got news from NHL player safety. The Panthers forward Matthew Tkachuk has been suspended for 2 games. Of course, the Panthers played the LA Kings last night, and he was poking at the mask of Jonathan Quick after the whistle. It seemed like he got a stick in there and made contact with Quick's face around the eye area. Player safety is basically referred to that as high sticking. It was kind of viewed that he was intentionally trying to injure Quick, and because of what he did, in combination with his history, you could say, because he has been suspended before, that he's giving a 2-game ban for this incident. Now, of course, I know there's some out there saying Tkachuk didn't do it intentionally or whatever, but it does kind of look like he did. At least that's the way I looked at it. But at the same time, we know Matthew Tkachuk is an agitator right heart. Like, that's what he does. He tries to get under your skin, and there's sometimes that he does things that does cross the line. Obviously, some are saying that Jonathan Quick kind of sold us, but I really don't think that was the case. You could see the stick in the mask area. It looked like he got in there pretty good. So he'll get a 2-game ban. Now, we're also waiting on the outcome, but Habs forward Josh Anderson also having a hearing today with NHL player safety for not a very good looking hit on Vegas defenseman Alex Pietrangelo. Didn't appear to be an injury on the play. Pietrangelo did get up afterwards and continue on. I know there was obviously led to some fights. A lot of the Vegas players on the ice went after Anderson right after the hit took place, but certainly was not a good looking hit. A very poor decision on Anderson's part. I do suspect something will come from that, likely at least a 1 or 2 game suspension as well, but as of the recording of this video, at least the outcome has not been mentioned. Of course, Florida was supposed to play again here tonight, which is why they had to make a decision on the Tkachuk situation a little bit faster. But Josh Anderson will likely hear either tonight or tomorrow on the outcome of his, but it's quite possible that the Montreal Canadiens will be without him for a couple of games or a game or two, depending on how they view that. As I mentioned, they already do have more than enough extra forwards in Montreal. There's still a lot of talk that we're likely going to see a forward or 2 moved out, probably soonish. I'm thinking I wouldn't be shocked if it happens in the next week or so, to be completely honest. A player like Evgeny Dadonov, I think will either be put on waivers or be moved, possibly with salary retained, and I wouldn't be surprised if it happens here in the short term. We had talked a few days ago about the fact that the Habs had conversations with a few teams, including the Washington Capitals, about a few of their forwards, and Dadonov being one of them. Guys like Mike Hoffman, Jonathan Drouin also in that conversation. I think Dadonov might be the more likely player to go, especially into Washington. If I had to say which one I thought would be the best fit there, I would say Dadonov myself, based on the fact that him and Durant are in the final year of their deal. So Hoffman has an extra year. That might not be attractive with how he's played recently. And of course, for Dadonov's sake, there's I think some better players that he might be able to fit better with there. Hard to say though, because really ever since he's left Florida, he's bounced around. He's had his moments where he's done well. Like he had not a great year, 1 year in Ottawa, but he had his moments where he scored some big goals. Then he goes to Vegas. Again, wasn't overly consistent, but he again had his moments, especially after the failed trade attempt because of the no trade teams on his list that somehow got screwed up as well when he was being moved or attempted to be moved. And then, of course, they later traded him to Montreal in the offseason, and so far this year, it just has not worked out, and it's clear that he needs to move on in some capacity. He needs to play somewhere else, and they clearly need some space and the roster flexibility. So waivers might be an option if we don't see that. But I'd be quite surprised if we don't see a Dadonov trade in the very near future here, possibly even this week. Drouin and Hoffman are in those conversations, but I would suspect those deals might take a little longer, but that's just a personal gut feeling on that one. On to some injury updates and some roster moves. Some more moves here. Calgary lost Michael Stone, ends up on injury reserve. Of course, Chris Tanev has also been out recently as well, so that's a big blow to their back end. Fortunately, they do have good depth on the blue line, and they do have a really solid defense core, but of course they, earlier in the season lost a guy like Valimaki too, so they're kind of starting to feel the pinch a little bit on the back end, even though they have lots of good players there. That still hurts. They've had to recall Dennis Gilbert and Nick DeSimone, so obviously the Flames haven't been playing great hockey as of late, so that certainly could play an impact here on their next little bit of games. Of course, as I mentioned about the Maple Leafs, with a goalie injury. Now, of course, that was not something they've seen coming and not something that they really wanted to see coming. They already have Matt Murray out, who's only played, I believe, one regular season game, ended up on injured reserve. And I guess there's some talk Murray might come back soon. According to Sheldon Keefe, he's supposed to return to practice this week, but no timeline yet on a return to be able to play in the game. But of course, Ilya Samsonov, who's been a pretty solid steady goaltender for the Leafs in Murray's absence. He's been able to get the ball and run with it, and he's done a good job for the most part, I think. He's been a bright spot for them for sure, looking like he was bouncing back this season. And then he goes down with an injury against the Boston Bruins. I think a lot of his teammates realized what was happening when he came out for the third period. Samsonov was not there. Erik Källgren had to take over. They did survive and continue to win that game because they were leading at the time, which is good. They're playing the Carolina Hurricanes as I record this video. It's, I believe, near the end of the second period, and it's a tie game. So we'll see how they get through on this, but the Samsonov injury certainly prompted lots of questions. Now, the problem here as well is that outside of Erik Källgren, they didn't have an NHL goaltender signed to be able to call up, to be able to make some movement here. So they had to sign Keith Petruzzelli. Now, Petruzzelli looks like a real promising young goaltender. He's 23 years old. He was originally drafted back in 2017 by the Detroit Red Wings. At that point, was a highly regarded goaltending prospect. Played his 4 years of college hockey and did not sign with the Red Wings. I believe he was at Quinnipiac, I believe is where he played his college hockey, but he never signed with Detroit. I was quite surprised, to be honest. I really thought that he was a good enough goalie prospect because his college hockey time, his stats were really good. So it was not a case, I can't imagine, of Detroit not wanting to sign him. I think he was just trying to, get to the free agency part and make his own decision. He signed with the Leafs last year, split the season, a little bit of time between the East Coast League and the Marlies. So far this year, he's been 6-0 with the Marlies, putting up amazing stats, and so he gets upgraded in his contract because they had to call him up. And it just made sense to get this contract done. Fortunately, where they lost Nick Aube-Kubel on waivers in the last couple of days, that opened up a contract spot because you can only have 50 NHL contracts at any given time. They were at 50 for a while. They dropped to 49, losing him on waivers. Gave them the option to sign Petruzzelli. So in a way, that was kind of a blessing in a sense. As much as I was, confused as to why they would let Aube-Kubel walk through waivers like that, but still, it would have been more complicated now had that not happened. So he gets a 2-year ELC because of his age, being 23 years old, and he will be able to play. He's going to be backing up tonight and in their game against the Carolina Hurricanes. We'll see if he gets any game action or not. Right now on Samsonov's injury, they're saying it's probably going to be at least a week, but they're waiting on an MRI to kind of get a more clear picture of what he's dealing with, what kind of timeline he's going to be dealing with here as well. So it's hard to say, Keith's words were Murray's return is on the horizon. So hard to say, but no matter what happens with Samsonov and with Murray, Petruzzelli has definitely earned himself a 2-way contract. I don't think they'll regret doing that. Like I said, I was surprised that they were able to get him as a college free agent, essentially, because he was a pretty well-regarded prospect. I was surprised with the competition there that he ended up with the Leafs, but it might turn out to be a terrific signing and go. They also get Timothy Liljegren back for today's game as well, which will hopefully be a good boost to the blue line. So we'll see what the Leafs do, but there's certainly some talk as well within that is, will the Leafs trade for a goaltender because of what's happened here? Lots of talk today. A bunch of articles came out from different writers, and honestly, honestly, I don't see that happening until they had a more clear picture. Like if they ended up in a spot where they knew Matt Murray or Ilya Samsonov was going to be gone for the season, then maybe I could see that happening, but I don't really see a scenario where they're going to make a trade. Now, would they consider a waiver claim or something if a cheap NHL veteran goalie popped up as something they could claim for nothing? Maybe, but like I said, they're now at 50 contracts, so that also complicates things as well. So they probably actually couldn't do a waiver claim without moving somebody else on waivers themselves, or doing a trade, which would probably be even easier. So at the end of the day, getting another goalie, not exactly the most easy task here. I'm not really sure where they would look to around the league, and if either Murray or Samsonov is going to come back later in the season, then they need that available space, even though they might be on LTIR short term. It's still not a long enough term scenario to really be replacing them through a trade like that. So will the Leafs go trading for a goaltender? I really don't think so. Or if they do, it's going to be like maybe a short-term goalie they don't mind putting on waivers later. But like I said, it's complicated where they're maxed out on how many contracts they can carry. Unless we see them, shedding some space here in another way, moving another player or two out, then it's going to be complicated to do much of anything. So we'll have to see where that goes. But for right now, they're going to try to see if they can get through with Källgren and Petruzzelli and hope that one of their other two goalies can make a return in the not too distant future. Now, on to some other news from injuries and some other roster moves. The Columbus Blue Jackets, of course, returned from Finland, lost both games to the Avalanche. They've reassigned goalie Daniil Tarasov and defenseman David Jiricek back to the American Hockey League. Of course, something's got to give there in Columbus as well. Are we going to see a coaching change? Brad Larson was a longtime assistant there before he became the head coach. Jarmo Kekalainen, of course, has been the GM for quite some time. We've only got one playoff series victory, and now the team is worse than before and is hitting new lows, so to speak, after some pretty good-looking moves in the offseason. So things are not working out in Columbus at all. So you have to wonder what's coming next there. Is, we're going to see Kekalainen make a trade or two to try to shake things up. They certainly need help on the blue line. They also need help at center ice. Those are just a couple of big glaring holes, and they're massively important positions to have your team really be successful. So it's complicated. Or are we going to see a potential scenario where we have some other changes between either behind the bench or in the front office? I don't know. It's really hard to predict, but they're off to a terrible start. They're projecting right now to be a lottery team, which is not where they expect it to be, and at least not as low as they are at the very least. And I wouldn't be shocked if we see some big changes there in the not too distant future as well. The Ottawa Senators reassigned Jacob Bernard-Docker back to the American Hockey League. They called him up to not play him so he could miss time in the American Hockey League, then send him back. Mind-boggling recall. Not really sure why they bothered doing that. The New York Islanders have reassigned Robin Salo back to the American Hockey League in Bridgeport as well. They're certainly comfortable with Sebastian Aho being returned in the lineup and playing a more regular role. Obviously, they want Salo to go down and play a big role at Bridgeport. We'll see when he gets called back up. The LA Kings have sent down Quentin Byfield, the former number 2 overall pick in the NHL draft a few years ago. Byfield's got a decent amount of NHL experience right now, but certainly getting a chance to go down and maybe have a bigger role and see if he can't come back up probably later on in the NHL season and be more confident and hopefully have more success there. The Coyotes have officially placed Nick Schmaltz on injured reserve along with Philip Zadina in Detroit as well, so they're both going to be out for approximately 10 days or so. Now on to some other stuff around the NHL. On 32 Thoughts segment last night on Hockey Night in Canada, Jeff Merrick was updating us on the Bo Horvat situation, saying that there's been no meaningful progress. It doesn't really sound like there's a whole lot of anything going on. If there is, it's quiet, and there's not really any movement by the sounds of things on the potential new deal for the captain in Vancouver. Of course, the team had another blown lead last night. They had a few good games in between, but then a lot of things crept back into their game last night as well. So I know Elliot Friedman on a recent podcast made the comment saying that he's not sure the Canucks should be signing anybody long-term with the way they've been playing this year. I know he, on a next podcast, updated his remarks and said he kind of regretted saying that. But at the same time, I don't entirely disagree with him. Like, when you have a team that's clearly needing something to be different, do you really want to start handing out long-term deals? Like, at the same time, they signed Miller long-term in the offseason. Right now, I'm not really convinced that was the greatest move. Like, he's had his moments offensively, but there are times when you honestly have to question the heart and the effort with Miller. A few plays that just were glaring, things that I wouldn't expect from him, considering the kind of player he normally would be. But at the same time, does Bo Horvat want to stay if the team is going to be in a messy situation? I know his heart probably is in Vancouver. He's been there a long time, been the captain. He's off to a phenomenal start, even though the team hasn't been doing the best. He himself individually is having a solid year, which is not going to hurt his price tag at all. And I'm sure there's lots of teams out there who'd love to get their hands on Horvat should he unrestricted free agency. So again, no progress yet made. Not saying that a trade's going to be made, but they're questioning right now amongst NHL insiders is how long the Canucks are going to take to make a decision here on his fate. Whether they're going to give up on negotiations and make a trade, or are they going to push hard to re-sign him? It's not quite clear as of yet, but a trade certainly does seem possible. And of course, with the Maple Leafs, I just want to take a look. Again, we already talked about the fact that they, there's lots of talk about them trading for a goalie, which I don't think is going to happen. But I know Kevin Weeks made comments here recently talking about Rick Robertson, wondering if he might be another player to maybe get away from the Leafs. He referenced Mason Marchment as being a player that obviously got away on them, who was in the Leafs organization, has become a real solid player elsewhere. And of course, you hate to see that happen to any NHL team, but it does happen. You get a player not getting the opportunity, they move on, things blossom, and then become a star somewhere else. And of course, that's a big concern for any NHL team making trades, especially with players that are younger and still developing. But Robertson, of course, at one point had a great game against the Dallas Stars, got called up, scored a couple goals, including the overtime winner. And yet, even though the team himself, the Leafs have played better the last few games, they're still not scoring as high as you would think they were. In secondary scoring, I think it's fair to say, a bit of an issue. And you know what? He can't get in a lineup. He's been scratched for the last few games. And at some point, which I don't think we're there yet, but I think what Weeks is getting at is at some point you have to think the frustration will grow on Robertson's side to, not be given the opportunity, so to speak. But at the same time, we also know that the Maple Leafs, they may have to make changes in goal. They may want to add on the blue line. And if they're not playing Robertson regularly, is he a player they would consider trading to make some upgrades to have a stronger chance at a playoff run? You do have to wonder what their thoughts are. It seems like when he gets the chance, he's done well, but he's not getting that chance consistently, and you really have to wonder what their thoughts are on him. And I think they would probably hate to see him be the one, like Marchment, to get away and become a star player somewhere else. Now, in their defense, Marchment is becoming a heck of a hockey player, and it really broke out last year in Florida. Has had a great start in Dallas so far, but I don't think anybody would have predicted that. When Marchment left Toronto, he wasn't even a frontline player at the American Hockey League level. He had a handful of games in the NHL, which didn't really show a whole lot, and then at the American Hockey League, even wasn't. Like I said, it's not like he was a star player there that was glaring in front of you for a chance and they didn't give it to him. I think anybody would have predicted that he wasn't going to be a star. He might become like a bottom six player at best, is what I know my thoughts were back probably 3 or 4 years ago. And even then, I thought that was questionable. And now he's become a real solid player. But it's unfortunate that he didn't do that in Toronto. But I don't know that that's fair to really call the comparison there. I don't think the Robertson and Mason Marchment comparisons are really legitimate at all. Like, it's just bad comparison in my opinion. But Robertson's side, I think he should be playing. We'll see if they can get him in the lineup. But I do see Weeks' point saying that if they're not going to play him, you have to think that he could be a trade piece to gain other areas, or will frustration grow on his side and maybe want to move on as well if it drags on too long. So we'll see. Should Robertson be in the Leafs lineup? Let me know your thoughts as well as everything else discussed here today. Down in the comments, we'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, of course, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the latest news, rumors, and analysis on all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.